Hello, I'm Rob Long from Mass and Sports, and I'm here with Bob Kendrick, who happens to be the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum. First of all, welcome.
Rob, thanks so much, man. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, too. Good to see you. Thank you so much for what you've done. We're here to celebrate 100 years of Negro League Baseball.
Yes.
And I said to you once, Bob, that to me it feels like with some things in history that the farther we get away from it, the more we forget. But for some reason, Negro League Baseball is the opposite. The farther we get away from it, the more we seem to embrace. All the way down to this year, Buck O'Neil will be inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame.
Got my fingers
exactly.
crossed. I mean, my fingers crossed.
This
Absolutely.
is 100 years later. It's about time.
Well, and I hope, Rob, the work that we've been doing in Kansas City at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum has helped kind of enlighten and grow the interest in the history of our sport. But as I tell people all the time, no sport holds to its history the way baseball does.
I agree.
It absolutely does. It is still the most romanticized sport of them all. Yeah, I was telling some of the young players today when I got a chance to speak with them, you know, typically whoever your favorite baseball player was when you were a kid, they're going to be your favorite baseball player the rest of your life.
Right.
And for me, it was Henry Aaron. And in my eyes, there will never be a baseball player better than Henry Aaron.
Right.
Even if they are better than Henry Aaron,
that's me.
They won't be in my eyes.
That's me and Eddie Murray.
There you go.
You'll never find another baseball player better than Eddie Murray.
And Eddie was good too, man. Now, you know, one of the greatest switch hitters. This guy, we had the honor of inducting him into our Hall of Game. Every year, the museum does an annual ceremony that we call the Hall of Game, and it recognizes and honors former major leaguers who we believe played the game the way they played it in the Negro Leagues.
Right.
So you played it with passion. You obviously played it with a high skill level, but you also played it with a little swag.
Right.
Yeah, as they say, you got to have that if you were going to play in the Negro League.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And Eddie was the consummate professional, taught himself how to switch hit, 500 home runs later.
3,000 hits later.
Yeah, 3,000 hits later. And so we had a great time inducting him into our Hall of Game. And, well, as you can well imagine, when a lot of people come through the museum, a lot of baseball fans did not know that Henry Aaron's illustrious professional career began in the
Negro Leagues. I know.
And so there's this wonderful picture of him standing at the train station, 18 years old. He must weigh 160 pounds, maybe. And he's standing there, and he's about to go leave to join the Indianapolis Clowns, 1952. Skinny, cross-handed, hitting shortstop. So in Henry Aaron's case, he was a right-hand hitter who was hitting with his left hand on top.
Yeah.
That's unorthodox. The fear is that you break your wrist hitting in that manner.
I remember that growing up because I hit cross-handed.
A lot of kids in the country did. Yeah, and Henry is knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. When it gets to the Clowns, they put the right hand on top. The rest, as they say, is history. Yeah, he's shortly after discovered by the Boston Braves, who would become the Milwaukee Braves, who, of course, would become the Atlanta Braves. Henry Aaron will go down in this sport as one of his all-time greatest players, but it all began for him in the Negro Leagues.
Well, I want to go back to that. You said something. You said it eventually started off in Boston with one of the last team to integrate. And he ended up in Atlanta in the Deep South. What people talk about the home run record, but what they fail to talk about is what Henry Aaron did to society. Who was chasing him around the bases? And not in a threatening manner.
No, they were coming to celebrate.
They were coming to celebrate.
Atlanta.
Where else in Atlanta could you have found that during the early
1974.
Yes.
1974. And of course, I shared the story today with some of the folks. And 25 years later, after he breaks Ruth's record, he's in Kansas City to make his first visit to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Sad to say, it took him 25 years before he was able to actually, truly celebrate what many thought was the most prestigious sports accomplishment ever, because he was getting death threats. And his family's in hiding. And so when the two young men run out on the field, he chased out because he thought maybe they were coming out to do something. No, they were coming out to celebrate. In the Deep South. Yeah, in the Deep South. Yeah, absolutely. And it was one of the most amazing moments. He's one of the most amazing individuals that I've ever had the opportunity to meet. The grace, the class, the dignity in which he conducted himself during that entire pursuit of Ruth's record. Because again, there were some folks who just They cringed at the notion that a black man in the South was about to break a record that nobody ever thought would be broken.
Right.
Yeah, but he was the model of consistency. I tell people all the time, you take away all 755 home runs, he still has over 3,000 hits. Yeah, Henry Aaron, in a game of numbers, no one's numbers are better than Henry Aaron.
Yeah, you could easily say maybe the best baseball player of all time. Listen, the Negro Leagues has a huge impact on society.
Yes.
You talk about giving the Hall of Game award to major leaguers.
Yes.
And that relationship to me is significant because MLB and MLB Players Association made a huge contribution, of course, to the National Negro League Museum.
I'm still smiling.
Yeah, I know you are. Better cash it quickly.
No, they made a very generous $1 million contribution to support the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum as part of this year's centennial celebration and to just help us continue to do the things that we've been doing through the years to make sure that history lives on, that the life lessons from the Negro Leagues are there for young, aspiring baseball players in particular to be able to gravitate to. And I hope it inspires them. Mm-hmm. And this was the second gift that they had made to the museum. They did another gift in 2017 of $1 million. So, we are obviously very appreciative of the support. And really, I think to have
you're appreciative of 100,000. You're downright giddy over $1 million.
Over $1 million, yeah, absolutely. You got that right. But to have both arms of our industry, Major League Baseball and its Players Association, embrace the museum in this manner, in many ways it validates the importance of this museum. And the first time in 2017 when Commissioner Manfred and Tony Clark, the executive director of the Players Association, were there in Kansas City. And you're right, we were absolutely ecstatic about the resources. But in some ways, it meant just as much to have the two leaders of our industry standing there at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum for the world to see this, that it meant something, that it was special. And this museum is absolutely special. It is the story of Major League Baseball, both bad
and good.
And
I'm so glad you said that because when we hear Negro Leagues, we think it's something that black people should celebrate. When it's really a part of our history. It's as much a part of our history as anything else.
This is American
if you look
history.
at baseball today, you may argue that Babe Ruth's numbers were more legitimate than Josh Gibson's. But what people don't understand is the Negro Leagues, although it was called the Negro Leagues, it had black players as well as Latin American players.
Absolutely.
So there was more diversity in Josh Gibson's league than there was in Babe Ruth's league.
Because the Spanish-speaking athlete was shut out of Major League Baseball as well. Now, once upon a time, white Cubans, I don't know why white Cubans got singled out, but white Cubans could play. But if you were of any dark-skinned descent, you couldn't play in the Major Leagues either. So where did they play? They played in the Negro Leagues.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, as I shared with some of the Spanish-speaking athletes today, many Negro League players were the first Americans to play in many Spanish-speaking countries.
Okay.
They're the first. And of course, when they went to those countries, man, they treated like heroes. Mm-hmm. They were staying in the finest hotels. They were eating in the finest restaurants that those countries had to offer, and then come back home, and you treat it like second-class citizens. Mm-hmm. So as a result, a lot of Negro League players would call those Spanish-speaking countries home for one very simple reason. You see, in those countries, they weren't black baseball players.
Baseball players.
Just baseball players.
There you go.
That's all they ever wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so the dark-skinned Spanish athlete, when they came here, they couldn't play. And as I tell them, when Jackie breaks the color barrier, he doesn't do it for just American-born blacks. He does it for every player of color who now enjoys our great sport. Mm-hmm.
I've often said, and I'd like for you to weigh in on this, I think the most important figure of the civil rights movement was a man who was part of the civil rights movement before it was labeled that. Yeah. And that was Jackie Robinson. I thought he was the most important because baseball back then, along with boxing, was America's sport.
That's it.
Baseball, boxing, horse racing.
Yeah.
So you took America's pastime and now you integrated it with this guy.
Yeah.
To me, it was so significant.
Yeah, no, I completely concur. And the museum makes the bold assertion that Robinson's breaking of the color barrier wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement, but as you indicated, it was the beginning of the civil rights movement. This is 1947. This is well before those more noted civil rights occurrences. This is before Brown versus the Board of Education. Mm-hmm. This is before Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus. As my dear friend, the late great Buck O'Neill would so eloquently say, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a sophomore at Morehouse College when Robinson signed his contract to play in the Dodgers organization. President Truman would not integrate the armed forces until a year after Jackie. So for all intents and purposes, this is what started the ball of social progress rolling in our country, baseball. And our country literally jumped on the coattail of baseball. But as you mentioned, it was our national pastime.
It was.
Yeah, it was our national pastime. And really, if you were going to make a living playing a team sport, it was baseball. Yeah, because basketball and football were more or less collegiate sports, even though you had the NFL, which had integrated before Major League Baseball did, but nobody was caring about the NFL, and nobody cared really about the NBA. And so if you're going to make a living in playing sports in this country, team sport, it was baseball. Or if you're going to get in the ring with Joe Louis, and not too many people were making that business decision. So that's not a good business decision. So a lot of the greatest athletes in the world gravitated to baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born and raised in Baltimore City. My aunt, the late Joanne, the way she kept me out of trouble was when I was 4 years old, she put me in a 5-7 baseball league at James Mosier, which is historical baseball league in Baltimore. That's her way of keeping me out of trouble. At James Mosier, I learned about teams like the Baltimore Elite Giants, the Baltimore Black Sox, because they embraced that history. Yeah. Elite Giants not too far from that place there, but baseball, the Negro Leagues, has rich history in the city of Baltimore.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Its roots are very deep in Baltimore, starting with the Baltimore Black Sox and then evolving into the great Baltimore Elite Giants, and of course a young Roy Campanella joining the Elites when he was 15 years old. Yeah, Campy's 15 years old. And as they say, he was probably one of the biggest 15-year-olds you ever seen. But he's 15 years old when he joins the Elites, and a great catcher by the name of Raleigh Biz Mackey, who was then also managing the club, takes Campy under his wings and teaches him the art of catching. If Roy Campanella was alive today, he'd tell you that Biz Mackey was the greatest defensive catcher this sport has ever seen. He was an outstanding backstop. He's a great signal caller, had control of his team. He's a great player, he could hit. Now Gibson was probably the best complete catcher when you look at offense and defense. But when you're looking at it from a defensive standpoint, Raleigh Biz Mackey. But the catching position did not transition into the major leagues.
Right.
See, the catching position, pitching, and shortstop, these are kind of considered the cerebral positions. And there was still this stereotypical belief that the black players weren't smart enough. The catching position in the Negro Leagues was actually far superior than it was in the Major League. The Negro Leagues always had great catchers. Yeah, they really did. And there was a catcher named Earl Taborn, Mickey Taborn, played for the Kansas City Monarchs. And of course, they would put on a show. And you know how the catcher is supposed to back on a base hit, the catcher is supposed to back up first base.
Right.
Mickey Taborn would beat the runner to the bag.
First base.
Putting on a show. And the fans just going crazy.
You talk about baseball teams putting on a show. I think one of the movies that kind of shows that more than anything was Bingo Long and the Traveling All-Stars movie.
Yeah.
But I just didn't think about this today. You said black players back then traveled to Latin American countries to watch and play baseball. When I was in Puerto Rico several years ago, it was right around the playoffs. Yeah. There was a parade leading to the playoff game. It was one game. It wasn't a clincher. It wasn't game one. It was in the middle of the series. Is it a coincidence that the Negro Leagues or did the Negro Leagues learn that, or vice versa from?
They took that style.
It took that style from the Latin American countries.
They took that style to Latin America.
Or to Latin American countries.
Yeah, and it still played that way. That's what I love about the Spanish-speaking athlete. they play the game with a little flair.
Yeah.
And maybe it annoys some folks sometimes because they do play. They might flip the bat and that kind of thing. But, if I can tell you now.
When Jose Bautista did it, I thought to myself, this whole country's been waiting for
this. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. He did it for Canada, man. Come on.
I can tell you now, if you got mad about bat flip, you weren't gonna play in the Negro League. If you don't want me to flip my bat, you better figure out how to get me out. But because they did play the game, and old Buck, God bless his soul, and I had the opportunity to go over to the Buck O'Neill complex here and talk to the minor league guys, and he would always say that the major leaguers would accuse them of showboating.
Right.
If a guy went in the hole, flipped it behind his back to start the double play. Well, today we see that on SportsCenter. That's top 10 highlight almost every night on SportsCenter. Right. But as Buck would oftentimes say, it's only showboating when you can't do it. And as he oftentimes would say, if you got something to show it. Show it.
It's a show.
Show it. And that's why fans flock to those Negro League games. As he would oftentimes say, you couldn't go to the concession stand because you might miss something that you've never seen before.
I like the show. I paid my money. I want to see a show.
Well, you were going to see great baseball. You were going to see very fundamentally sound, great baseball. But they also knew that this game was entertainment. And they were going to put on a show. Yeah, no, and fans, both black and white, flocked to those games. Now you got to remember, this is an era of segregation, and at Negro League games, we're sitting together watching what some will say the best baseball being played in this country. Most will say without question the most entertaining brand of baseball being played in this country. Now we might go our own separate ways after those 2 hours were over, but for those 2 hours we were sitting together. The only exception would have been the Deep South. Man, Birmingham, there was not going to be any intermingling.
No, it's not going to be
intermingling of the races. But pretty much everywhere else, we were sitting together watching those games.
So what you're telling me is the Negro League didn't have an issue of pace of play?
No. No.
Nobody knew what time it was.
We had this conversation all the time. Man, if you give me something that I want to watch, I don't care how long I'm there.
Absolutely.
Just give me something I want to watch.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that style of play that they played, it kept you there. It kept you captivated, you glued. But man, you think about all these great characters. I mean, you got Satchel on the mound. Who wants to leave when Satchel's on the mound? You didn't know what he was going to do.
Right.
And I hope that this centennial will challenge people to maybe start to dig a little bit more about the history. And maybe it helps us uncover an artifact or two that can make its way to Kansas City so that we can tell the story. Because I can tell you now, there is no insignificant artifact. Every time that we get a piece that is a part of this story, it allows us to tell a new story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's always a story behind the story. And to see Richie Martin today.
Yeah.
And the great time that we had with him last year.
Now, he was part of a historic moment last year when he was there. Tell the folks about that.
And it gives me goosebumps still to think about it. Richie Martin's grandfather played in the Negro Leagues. And so the folks at the Orioles arranged for him and some other teammates to come out to the museum, and he got a chance to walk through the museum with me for his first visit. And you could see the pride emanate as he was pointing out pictures to his teammates of his grandfather, who had played with Jackie Robinson with the Kansas City Monarchs in 1945. And so, yeah, that takes on a whole new meaning. I delight every time that I get a chance to take a player through the museum. And it doesn't matter what color they are. But when you talk about someone who is a direct descendant of a player.
Have you ever been in that situation before?
Well, with the Harrison brothers.
Right.
Scott Harrison and Jerry Harrison.
Jerry Harrison.
Their grandfather, Sam Harrison, played in the Negro Leagues. They look just like their grandfather.
Right.
Yeah, they really do. And both, when they came into the museums, particularly Scott, he had his wife with him. And I didn't have to point out the picture of his grandfather. When she saw the picture, she knew. She, there he is. But the same thing. It was that same level of pride that they had. And so those two moments isolated in time, looking at Richie Martin and then looking at the Harrison brothers, both Scott and, and Jerry, having had the opportunity to come there when they're part of this legacy. Yeah, that meant a lot. In situation that means a great deal to us anyway. You know, when we get athletes come through there, young major leaguers come through there, it never gets old. I delight in telling the stories. I love immersing them into this experience. But like I said, when you get someone who are the direct descendants of, that's a whole nother level.
Now, everyone can't get to Kansas City. Is there some place they can go online to find out more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. To learn more about the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, please visit our website at nlbm.com. If you're so inclined, you can follow me on Twitter at NLBMPrez, and my Instagram handle is the same, NLBMPrez. We keep you updated on everything that's happening as it relates to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And we also encourage you to consider becoming a member of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We have issued a challenge for baseball fans to help us match Major League Baseball's $1 million gift by considering making a contribution of $100 for 100 years of the Negro Leagues. And you can do that at nlbm.com/centennial. And if you can't make a $100 contribution, make a contribution of any amount that you can afford to do so. It all enables us to make sure that the legacy of the Negro League plays on long after there are no Negro League players left to attest to this great league.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and for the great speech you gave to the youngsters, the ball players, man. Appreciate that.
Oh, no, man.
Continue to do what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for having me.